Good evening, Cornerstone. Good to have you back. Today what we're going to talk about is something every single one of us has experienced or will experience at some time in their life. We're going to be looking at Israel back in the Old Testament. And they were at a point in their life where there was so much uncertainty, so much just stuff going on, which would have caused them to question which way they should go. So this is right after Moses died, right? So we're going to be looking at Joshua chapter 1, and we're going to be looking at the instructions that God gave to Israel in this situation, because they're instructions that will work for us too when we find ourselves in these situations. And right now we're in this situation. I mean, I don't think there's ever been more uncertainty in our world in my lifetime. I don't think there's ever been more of a time in my life where planning seems to go out the window. You know, I mean, at the beginning of this year, a lot of us would have had a lot of plans to travel, plans to do a lot of things, right? I know I did. But right now, because there is so much uncertainty, we don't know what's going to happen next. And the thing is, even if in Bermuda we get everything secure, like there's 0 cases of the virus, still we're affected by what's happening around the world. And so it even becomes difficult to make plans, even if we get complete control over our situation locally. So I think there's never been more of a time where these instructions were more needed for us. I know for me in my lifetime. So the backstory was, they were in Egypt and they were slaves and they were treated harshly. Then God rescued them. Moses was raised up. And then they had an opportunity to enter the land. They sent in spies. They decided not to. They wandered in the desert so that an entire generation died off before they entered the land again. But I often wonder, in those 40 years of wandering, how much did the younger generation hear from the older generation about what went on before? So they would probably have some idea. And then at the end of Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy chapter 34, we read this in verse 8. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the Spirit and wisdom because Moses had laid hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. So in this transition period, first of all, the Lord gives them a time to grieve, which shows that the Lord wants them to deal with what's going on in their hearts, because Moses was their only leader. But then he establishes someone else to lead them through this uncertain time, and that young man's name was Joshua. And now we go into Joshua chapter 1. And we're just going to read through a few verses there and make some points concerning the instructions given. So it says, Joshua chapter 1, verse 1, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, that doesn't seem like something we should be commenting on, but one of the things that I want you to understand, I've heard a number of people say this: Christianity is escapism. So what you do is you ignore everything that's going on around you, and you get to, it's a crutch. So you get to put your mind and your thoughts somewhere else, and they use an expression like, you're so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. Well, if someone has their mind stayed on Christ the way they should be, then that person is of more benefit to the earth than anybody else. So here's what he starts off with. He says, Moses, my servant, is dead. So he is basically saying, here's the situation you find yourself in. He is realistic with them. And God is always realistic. I mean, how could Christianity be escapism if Jesus told us that in this world we will have trouble? It's not escapism at all. So one of the things we need to understand with God is he wants us to have an understanding and appreciation of where we are in our situation. Because to not have an understanding of where you are in your situation is to ignore what's happening in your situation, which means that whatever path you take, won't be based on the reality of your situation. But what God wants us to understand is whilst there is a reality of our situation, there is another reality as well. And that is the reality of Christ in our life and his power, his grace, his mercy, and how that operates in our life as well. So he says to Joshua, first, Moses, my servant, is dead. And then he goes on to list three things that we're going to see that are key when we are in a time of where things are uncertain. One, he goes on to list his plan. Then he gives Joshua the promises associated with that plan. Then after that, he speaks about his presence. So he says, basically, Joshua, I have a plan. I'm going to give you some promises. And then I'm going to let you know that I am present. And then after that, he tells them to persevere. Okay? So let's see what the Bible has to say. He says, now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan into the land that I am about to give them to the Israelites. So the first thing he says, Joshua, I had a plan with Moses. My plan is the same. And that is to give Israel the land. So get yourself ready for the plan that I have instructed you to be fulfilled. So one of the things that we need to understand is no matter how uncertain things get, God always has a plan. See, sometimes we feel like God doesn't have a plan when our plans are messed up, because the plan was for Moses to lead them into the land. And so because that plan was messed up, what it would feel like to these people is that the entire plan is messed up. Listen, when something changes, it doesn't mean the plan of God has changed, or it doesn't even mean that you need to look for a new plan. Sometimes it means that you have to find a different way to execute the plan of God. And that's what God does. He raised up Joshua, who Moses had laid his hands on. Remember, we read that in Deuteronomy. So sometimes when things are just all over the place and there's so much uncertainty, what we feel like is we can't plan. And because we can't plan, it feels like God can't plan. Understand something. No matter how uncertain things get, God always has a plan. God is never without a plan. God has a huge plan for mankind, but he also has a plan for Cornerstone Bible Fellowship as a church, but he has a plan for your individual lives as well. And so he reminds Joshua, listen, Moses is gone, that's the reality of your situation, but the same plan that I had for Moses and Israel, I still have for this new generation. So first, he tells them about their plan. And then what he says is, I will give you every place where you set your foot, as promised Moses. So now I was talking about his promises. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. So the next thing he says is, listen, everything I promised Moses. First, everything, the plan I had for Moses and Israel still stands, and every promise that I gave to Moses, I give to you. Okay? So he's saying, just because things seem uncertain, don't forget, Joshua, I still have a plan. And Joshua, also understand something. Just because things seem uncertain, my promises still stand. And one of the things that happen to us is when things get uncertain, we sometimes question God's promises. And when things don't go exactly the way that we think they should go, we sometimes question God's promises. So God is reassuring Joshua that every single promise that I made still stands. And you, Joshua, can stand on the promises and rest securely that I will keep my promises to you and to Israel. Okay? So what happened before with Israel was not God not fulfilling his promises. It was Israel not fulfilling the purpose or the plan for which God had called them to. So God's plan didn't cease, nor was his promises now null and void. They are still good. And so he reminds Joshua of that. The next thing he says is, no one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. So the next thing he does is, first he tells them about the plan. Then he reiterates his promises. And then he tells Joshua, as I was with Moses, I will be with you. So the third thing he says is, I will be present while you are executing the plan and while you are seeing the promises fulfilled. I will be present. I will be with you wherever you go. One of the things that we have to remember is that when things in our lives seem chaotic and change seems the only thing that is constant, and we feel like we can plan, is that God has not left us. He is still with us. And here's the thing, the presence of God, when we understand that he is lovingly present, it gives us the confidence to walk in his plan. See, when you feel like he's not present, then you're not going to walk in his plan. That's exactly what happened to Israel the first time they came to the land. When you understand that he is present, then you understand that he will keep his promises, and that gives you confidence to walk in his plan. Now, after he gives them the plan, after he tells them the promises, after he reminds them that he'll be present, he tells him to persevere. Okay, and here's what he says. He says, beginning in verse 6, be strong and courageous. Watch how many times he says this. Because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give to them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. There it is again. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So he then tells them to persevere. So he gives them the plan. He gives them the promises. He tells them he'll be present. He'll be with them. And then he says to persevere. And he does this by saying 3 times, be strong and courageous, because they're going to encounter some things that are going to be difficult. And what he is basically saying is, just because in this uncertain time, just because in this time where things aren't what you expect them to be, just because I've given you my plan and my promise, it does not mean, and I've also reminded you that I'm present, it does not mean that as you walk in my plan, as you walk in my promises, as I am present with you, it does not mean that you will not encounter something that is difficult. See, oftentimes we think when we encounter something that's difficult, that God's plans have just ended. They're going to come to Jericho with walls. They're gonna go to Ai where they have to have a fight. See, just because you have to fight through something, it doesn't mean you're not walking in God's plan and his promises, and it doesn't mean that he's not present. So that's why he tells them be strong and courageous, because you are going to encounter some things that could cause you to be weak and fearful. So be strong and courageous. And then he tells them, after he tells them be strong and courageous, make sure you obey everything that is in this book. He says, meditate on it. Don't turn to the left or the right, but make sure you know what it says and you do what it says. Because, and listen to what it says, because then you will be prosperous and successful wherever you go. See, we often think our lack of success has something to do with God leaving us. But he says you will be successful and prosperous if you know what is in the book, and if you do what it says. And here's the thing. God wants us to succeed. Okay? But again, remember this. That does not mean we may not have to engage in a battle or a fight. See, when you engage in a battle or a fight, then the promises of God are made true. His presence comes real when you keep going in his plan. See, oftentimes we get to the fight like they did last time and we say, I'm not going to do it. And we miss the opportunity for him to act on his promises. We miss the opportunity for us to see how present he is, and we miss the opportunity to see his plans come to fruition. We're going to end here. The very next words are, so Joshua ordered the officers. He heard the instructions from God. The very next word are, so Joshua. That is saying he acted on what God had just told him. He acted on God's plan because he believed God's promises and because he believed God would be present with him, and also because he knew that he would persevere. So immediately after getting the instruction from God, Joshua acts. And that's what we need to do in this time of uncertainty. When God speaks, act. Because in a time of uncertainty, when God speaks, we typically question whether what he's saying is really from him. We go, well, is that really because of this and that? When God speaks, act. That's how you get to see his plan come to fruition. His promises are true, and he is lovingly present with you. All right, Cornerstone, I hope this has blessed you. I hope this has given you some encouragement to stand and persevere and to be strong and courageous, but also to obey everything written in this book. And then God says you'll be prosperous and successful wherever you go. So tonight at 7 o'clock, we're going to be getting together on Zoom, and we're going to be talking about what we've just talked about today. Okay, so we'll be talking about God's plan. We'll be talking about God's promises, and we'll be talking about his presence. And we'll get to discuss that at prayer meeting tonight. I hope you'll be there, where we have such an awesome time. And then we'll pray together. See you tonight at 7.